unpack. We unpack. We unpack. Coming to you live, Boxing Ego unpack. Yeah. We unpack. We unpack. We unpack. Coming to you live. It was all good just a week ago. Bob Arum, he talks about Riyadh season and he breaks it down. Terrence Crawford, he's not a good promoter. He could do better. Bob Arum leaked some very interesting information in this video. I'm gonna break it down, let you know exactly what went on. So in a brand new interview with Dan Raphael, Bob Arum says, and I quote, "Because the Riyadh season ends in February, the earliest date for a rematch with Bivol would be next October." Question was, hey, can't they just do a show outside of Riyadh season like they did last year? Bob Arum says, that is not what they are going to do in the future. I think there was a lot of pushback on His Excellency for doing fights outside of Saudi Arabia and outside of Riyadh season. Now, pump your brakes. I made an unpacked video about this very topic this morning. You guys need to subscribe to the channel. I am the best in the business and it's not even close, and I'm on top of it, but I've already talked about it. So basically, Bob Arum spilled the beans that there was pushback from the higher ups that Turkey was starting to, get ahead of himself, so to speak, by staging events outside of Saudi Arabia. But initially, the whole goal was to bring light to the kingdom and make it a destination for sports and entertainment. So by doing fights, Crawford Madrimov in LA and Sean O'Malley, and spending a bunch of money for UFC 307 or whatever it was at the UFC sphere or the Vegas sphere, right? It's just like that takes away from what this is supposed to be about. So Bob Arum, and again, I already made a video about it, he's saying that they are trying to reel that back in and make this about Saudi more so than like expansion, which shows to me that they're losing money. They're losing money, wads of money, by putting on Crawford Madrimov UFC sphere, and it's not yielding any type of significant results. So they'd rather, refocus the energy. Check that video out. But this is the portion of the interview that gets very interesting. Bob Arum talked about Jared Anderson, his first professional loss on Riyadh season, to none other than Martin Bakole. Great performance by Bakole. He says, quote, "I want everybody to know that it wasn't us. His Excellency Turki Al-Sheikh went right to the fighter and made this proposal for money that the fighter had never seen before, and he picked his opponent, this Martin Bakole, who is a tenacious puncher. He never fought a guy like that, so the fact that he got taken apart and knocked out was not surprising." Wow, you have Bob Arum who's saying the fact that his fighter got destroyed by Martin Bakole wasn't a real big surprise, that he got taken apart, picked apart, and then knocked out. He says, "Don't put it on my matchmakers. We were against that fight. When they wave money at these kids, they insist on taking it. We let that fight go ahead, and it was the stupidest fight that Jared Big Baby Anderson could have taken. Man, I am so good at my job." The great Ego Stradamus strikes again. Now we are seeing the unraveling. A lot of you guys were saying, oh, Turkey, he's saving boxing. This is great. Riyadh season, things like that. I was the one, the voice of reason, per usual, in this boxing game. Like, I don't really understand that. For one, Turkey doesn't have his own stable, right? Maybe Terrence Crawford, who's kind of like a free agent, but outside of that, he doesn't have his own stable, which means he has to siphon and utilize the stables of others to make fights, like Esau Pitbull Cruz, PBC, versus El Rayo, PBC. So you have to get with PBC and pretty much overpay to make it make sense for them to take them off platform take him off of Amazon Prime, you know, and make the fight on really a DAZN card. Same thing with Jared Big Baby Anderson. That's a top ranked guy, and you are basically almost like leasing him out, right? Still a top ranked fighter, but you want him on your card, so you have to wave this money at him, like Bob Arum is saying. The problem when you don't have your own stable is Turkey kind of came in the boxing game, and at first I think people, they're like, oh cool, he wants the best versus the best. But this is sometimes the problem when people have a lot of money to toy with and play with, is they think the money is superior to everything, and they could just kind of dictate, and it kind of becomes a dictatorship. Like, imagine you were an engineer in a studio, right? And then the person who's the breadwinner, and he put up the money for the equipment and the microphones and stuff like that, and you want to do certain things your way, you don't really have the jurisdiction because you're not the one putting up the money. So ultimately, whoever's putting up the money and dropping that bag can veto and have that jurisdiction over what happens. And I think that's what happened here. Turkey, he started doing things his way, and then he started making fights that are just random fantasy fights or whatnot that he thinks would be a good fight and the public would like. But as I stated, and this is where I was dead on, the problem with that is it becomes disruptive to the real business of the sport of boxing, because if it is your fighter, you are trying to build and develop and ready your fighter for these moments. And then when they're ready, then they challenge for a title. Or once they're ranked high enough, then they challenge for a title. But when you're a person like Turkey, who really doesn't have his own stable and or allegiance specifically to any one fighter, it just becomes a smorgasbord of random fights, like almost buffet style, with no rhyme or reason. You're not really trying to develop fighters. And what's happened on the Riyadh season, which I've also talked about extensively on my social medias, is you got guys who are getting upset and beaten as the favorites, and they're losing to people that doesn't benefit the sport of boxing, so to speak. Let me explain. Like, let's say Anthony Joshua. Anthony Joshua beating Dubois would have been bigger for the sport of boxing and for Riyadh season, because they were trying to push Joshua versus Tyson Fury. But now it's like, who cares? It's like another Kell Brook, Amir Khan fight. Or now that Joshua lost and Dubois won, and then Joshua lost and Deontay Wilder lost, if AJ fights Wilder, it's not going to hit the same, because Wilder lost his last two fights and Joshua just got knocked out too. So Wilder's off a knockout loss, Joshua's off a knockout loss. Ammo Williams. Eddie Hearn spent all this time developing him. He was an undefeated fighter. You're trying to ready him for the big moments. Then you put him in with Hamza Shiraz, some 6-foot dude, and he ends up getting stopped, right? And so on and so forth. So some people are going to not get it or pretend that they're dumb and don't understand what I'm saying. The point is, I'm not saying you should cherry pick, but boxing requires development of fighters. There's no reason that a fighter who's young and has a whole career ahead of them needs to be rushed to a point where they're not really ready. Like Jared Big Baby Anderson, right? You could have kept building him and then step up his competition, but then you put him in with this big, huge Martin Bakole, who's almost 300 pounds taller than him and is punching like George Foreman. So now it's a major step back for all these fighters, right? Same thing with UFC. Sean O'Malley was doing very good for himself. You put him in with a durable, crafty wrestler like Merab, and then he looks probably the worst that he's looked, right? But he's considered a knockout artist in the UFC and a prime striker. But based on the matchup that you made, you don't really get to see the best of Sean O'Malley, because styles make fights. So while you guys are thinking this is great matchmaking, a lot of it is bad for the development. Look at Terrence Crawford. Crawford had all knockouts at welterweight and was coming off the Errol Spence fight. You put him in with this guy with 11 fights, and some people are saying, oh, it was a close fight. Oh, I think Crawford lost. And now at age 37, Crawford is coming off a performance that is just like meh. You know what I mean? So I totally understand what Bob Arum is saying here. He's saying, Lay, this doesn't fall on my guys. My matchmakers and me, we were against this fight for Jared Anderson. Because, again, despite what you guys say in the comment section, boxing, you do have to develop a fighter. Like, imagine Mike Tyson and they fast-tracked him, put him in with like 19 fights in a year. Then, you know, when he was ready, he challenged Trevor Berbick. And we seen he became the youngest heavyweight champion of all time, right? But imagine if you just forego all those 19 fights and then his first fight was Trevor Berbick. Do you understand what I'm saying? That wouldn't have made that much sense. So I understand people are like, no, man, the best first, the best, ego. But you still gotta do it in the right way to develop your prospect and then get him ready as a contender and then a champion. Jared Anderson had a very tough fight with Charles Martin and was hurt in that fight. Turkey decides, hey, let's put him in with somebody who's more active and bigger than Charles Martin and is hitting like a ton of bricks in Martin BAKOLE. But then they said they wanted Wilder versus Jared Anderson. And then you put Wilder in with Zelle Zhang, a 300-pound southpaw from China who can box. And he says, I'll bang you. And then Wilder gets knocked out. So now Wilder versus Jared Anderson is FUBAR. And then you put Jared Anderson, and then he could have been, you know, maybe in line for a big fight. But you put him in with, again, a guy like BAKOLE. Again, it just makes no sense. And you could tell that Riyadh season, they don't have any fighters because they're just playing musical chairs. And when you have your own stable, it is your job as a promoter to get them ready. Like, it's no different than the branches of military, right? The branches of military, you have to put them through basic, you got to put them through the boot camps. You got to go through Hell Week for the Navy SEALs. You don't just throw them in warfare. It's the same kind of concept. So I know people are going to act like they don't understand and say, oh no, best versus the best, but it doesn't work like that. Imagine some guys who skip Hell Week and you put them right into combat. They'll probably get the whole squad, you know, killed because they're inexperienced. They're not ready for that, right? But you do your best to ready people. And even then, sometimes in war, in times of combat, it still doesn't work. But at least they have the best fighting chance of knowing what to do when their gun misfires, or if they pick up an injury, or they've been through, you know, these hellish scenarios where they're in the Pacific Ocean freezing, and then you're in Vietnam or something and it's insanely hot, or you're in somewhere, Russia, on a mission and it's insanely cold. At least you have some experience. So I understand what Bob Arum is saying. You just put Jared Anderson, you took him out of basically preschool, elementary school, because Top Rank was building him and how they were moving him. And then you put him into college, and clearly he wasn't ready for that BAKOLE University, right? And that's not the way to go. And that's the way to get your fighters knocked off. So this is what I complained about, or my critique, not really a complaint, but more of a critique with Riyadh season, is there's no rhyme or reason to a lot of these matches. It's just like, hey, this will be a good fight. And that's indicative of somebody with money who just, hey, I want to randomly see this fight. And this is just not how it works for the sport of boxing. You have to develop your talent. The other thing to take away from what Bob Arum is saying is that he says that Turkey went directly to the fighter and like basically cut them out. So that's clearly not going to fly with a lot of people. The reason why I believe this is because it sounds like Turkey did this with others. He's publicly been on record and he says he wants to make a deal with Canelo, and he doesn't want to go through the proper channels or PBC or this and that. He wants to speak to Canelo directly, right? So the same thing with Tim Tszyu. There were some issues, and then Turkey said something to the effect of, oh, I don't know that I want to work with Tim Tszyu. You know, his team just doesn't get it, right? He was saying stuff like that, and I think it's more or less the same. instead of going through Al Heyman and PBC, Turkey thought he could wave money and go straight to the fighter and get this done, but they hired representation, be it PBC, be it Top Rank or whoever. There's a reason for that. You can't just come in and say, oh, you know, I'm the new supplier and cut out the middleman. These guys are under contract. So even if you did do this and you quote unquote cut out the promoter and the middleman, these guys are under contract. So that promoter has a signed legal document where the promoter is still going to get a cut of their money, right? So let's say Turkey worked out a side deal like G Money from New Jack City, and he says, oh, I want you to fight Virgil Ortiz, and Tim Tszyu doesn't check in or go through Al Heyman. Al Heyman has him under contract, so Al Heyman and PBC still going to get a cut of his money, right? Or let's say they did the deal with Jared Anderson, and he's like, man, I'm taking it. Top Rank is still getting a portion of his money, so it really doesn't do anything and make sense for the fighter not to talk to their advisor or their promoter on the matter, when ultimately, no matter what, their promoter is going to get a cut of their money. We've seen this also with Brian Norman and Jaron Ennis. They were in negotiations, and Brian Norman says Top Rank, they're going to get some of 30% or 25% or whatever of our money for us fighting on DAZN. Like, even if they lease us out and approve for us to fight on DAZN against Jaron Ennis, we want to make a certain amount, and Top Rank, per our contract, they're getting a portion of the money off top. So it literally serves no benefit to the fighter to hire a team, be under contract, and then listen and do a side deal with Turkey when you still got to pay the people you started with, Top Rank or whatever the promotional outfit that you're actually signed to, despite how much money he's throwing at you. So all in all, we'll see where this goes, but this is a bad look because you have side quests and side deals being done, and Bob Arum's now speaking out. Doesn't sound like he's a big fan of it. He's saying, we didn't want Jared Big Baby Anderson to take this fight. We were against the fight. And when people start throwing others under the bus, that usually says something, because no one knew about this until Bob Arum actually confirmed it. You know, I had speculations and I said, how is this going to work? Because again, Turkey and Riyadh season, they don't have a depth and a big pool of fighters to draw from. So you're stuck utilizing other promoters' stables. And the thing and the downside with that is they spend all this time to develop, let's say, Richard Torres or Jared Big Baby Anderson. You give them all this fights, get the person to 24-0, and then because you throw a lot of money because you want to make this fight that doesn't really even make sense for Jared Anderson, like, not saying it wasn't a good fight, it was a good fight, really, because of the end result and how it played out, and it was an upset and we seen a knockout. But for the trajectory of your fighter, maybe you don't do that. But again, when people come in and disrupt things and start throwing money around, Bob Arum is right. You know, people start throwing the money around and people start getting short-sighted. But for the long term of your stable, it doesn't benefit, because look at Riyadh season and where is the next step for these fighters? You know what I mean? Like, Jared Big Baby Anderson probably needs time off. That was a bad loss. Wilder was on the Riyadh season. He did 2 fights with Saudi Arabia and he lost both of them. In the second fight, he got knocked out, right? So where's the benefit? Like, we couldn't get, and here's the thing. It's not just about like trying to cherry pick to preserve your fighter so they don't lose. That's not what I'm saying. So please don't insult my intelligence. What I am saying is it is okay to lose, but you want to, at least if you've been promoting a fighter and building them up, you would want to lose, or not, you don't want them to lose, but you wouldn't mind as much if they lost when the fight made sense and it generates a lot of money, right? Like, of course, Pacquiao's side doesn't want Pacquiao to lose to Floyd Mayweather. but everybody involved made so much money, it is what it is. Versus losing to Zhang for Wilder or Joseph Parker, that hurts his career a lot. Versus if Wilder and Joshua fought, and instead of Joshua losing to Dubois, if he were to lose to a Wilder, or if he were to lose to like a Tyson Fury or Usyk in a trilogy, then that wouldn't be looked at exactly the same. You know what I mean? Because these are fights, and they would also generate a lot of money. But Daniel Dubois, he's a good fighter with power, and he clearly won. Credit to him. He can't take over in the UK and carry the torch like Joshua did for so many years. His personality's not the same, you know, things like that, despite him winning. So yeah, it's not just losing, it's like how you lose and who you lose to, and some matchmaking makes better sense. We unpacked